Good morning, ANC family from Austin and around the world. We're so glad that you're here with us this morning, whether you're online in front of your laptop or if you're the lucky family that's here with us right now, in person. In person. Sing a few songs together.
So, this next song, Jason sent me some lyrics when I was sitting in the winter grass in the backyard, and the title actually was Winter Grass, and I was just sitting in the backyard with the dogs, and I went inside and just started playing around on the piano, and really by the end of the day, this song came out, and that's not something that really happens all the time. So, if you don't know this one, we've only really done this one maybe once before. Some of y'all know it, but sing it if you know it, but otherwise let it wash over you a little bit. It happened again today. We said things we didn't mean in the heat of rain. We lit fire to what was left till it felt like nothing remained. But our kind of love never dies. It just finds a new way to grow like winter grass. When all is gone, it rises anyway. Something always rises from the pain. Something always rises from the pain. How are we here again? We hit walls we thought were thick, but were paper thin. Empty words thrown on the battlefield, but no one can win. But our kind of love never dies. It just finds a new way to grow like winter grass. When all is gone, it rises anyway. Something always rises from the pain. Something always rises from the pain. When will we accept? There's no way around. It has to fall down for something new to take its place. To take its place. 'Cause our kind of love never dies. It just finds a new way to grow like winter grass. When all is gone, it rises anyway. Something always rises from the pain. Something always rises from the pain. Something rises, something rises, something rises from the pain. Something rises, something rises, something rises from the pain. Something rises, something rises. it just finds a new way to grow like winter grass. When all is gone, it rises anyway. Something always rises from the pain. Something always rises from the pain.
Okay, we ready? All right. Well, good morning. It occurs to me, musicians, that it's possible that our friends in Michigan and Iowa might have absolutely no idea what we're talking about when we say winter grass. Yeah. Have you thought about that? That's clearly a Central Texas song. Sorry, y'all. I wasn't thinking about you, Indiana, when we wrote winter grass. It's actually a thing that happens here. So we just made the market of that song basically our neighborhood. So sorry about that, but I learned a lesson this morning about the clerical collar, and that is that I'm not nervous to speak in public, but having a song that, wait, it's not even snapped. Watch this. Having a song that Mark and I wrote together be sung right before I have to speak, that's anxiety provoking. And so I'm sweat through completely here. So I just felt like you needed to know that. For whatever reason, I can look at 10,000 people but sing a song, and man, I feel like, I don't know, like I've been exposed. So anyway, thank you, Mark, for that. So it's good morning. It's good to see you guys. If you hear sounds of babies in the room, we're going to let that happen today. There has not been the sound of a baby up in this place for over a year. So we are totally fine with Hank if Henry or Hank decides. I'm going to call him Hank if he kicks up some dust back there. But we're totally fine listening to the babies. So Mama, just don't worry. None of us are concerned. If you don't know what I'm talking about, it's because you don't know what a golden ticket is. We have some folks in the room this morning, and so we get to do the balance of speaking to you and acknowledging that someday we'll come back, and this is a foretaste of that. Families in a building, families in a room. I never thought I'd miss it, but I do miss it. So anyway, good morning. It's great to be back here with you today in this little space that we create together. So we are now somewhere near the middle of Lent 2021. Boy, did that go quick. And while 2020 was probably my least favorite year to date, it somehow gave birth to Lent of 2021, which interestingly might end up being my favorite Lent ever. I don't ever recall working this hard on all the details of a church season like this, even though we can't do any of this in person, and maybe that's part of it, but also, if I can be this honest today, I don't ever recall needing the good news of new life, of resurrection, of Easter quite as much as I do right now in my life. So we're at week 4 of nearly a 7-week journey from Ash Wednesday to Easter's empty tomb. We've been following the lectionary, and it really has been a beautiful discovery of these texts and of these themes that are woven in here for us. It's as if these ideas and lessons and these learnings were designed to stack one upon the other with a sort of internal logic rooted in stories almost too old and almost too weird to still believe. Now today, we turn our attention to the strangest of the lot of these 7 weeks, and it comes to us from the book of Numbers, chapter 21. Many of you have been looking at that strange little sticker all week from your Lenten box on the wall. I have children that can't even touch that sticker, in case you needed to know that. And were it not for John's mention of this little story in chapter 3 of his gospel, we may have succeeded in forgetting this old little piece of ancient history altogether. Still, I'm glad that John brought it up because it feels to me like a conversation worth having. So let's read that now, and it'll appear on your screen there. Numbers chapter 21, verses 4 through 9. Dropping right in, it reads this way, verse 4, from Mount Hor, they set out by the way of the Red Sea to go around the land of Edom, but the people became impatient on the way. Verse 5, the people spoke against God and against Moses. Why have you brought us up out of Egypt to die in the wilderness? For there is no food and no water, and we detest this miserable food. Verse 6, then the Lord sent poisonous serpents among the people, and they bit the people, so that many Israelites died. Verse 7, the people came to Moses and said, "We have sinned by speaking against the Lord and against you. Pray to the Lord to take away the serpents from us." So Moses prayed for the people. And the Lord said to Moses, "Make a poisonous serpent and set it on a pole, and everyone who is bitten shall look at it and live." And finally, so Moses, he made a serpent of bronze, he put it on a pole, and whenever a serpent bit someone, that person would look at the serpent of bronze and live. See what I mean? It's an odd story, isn't it? Now, in John chapter 3, the apostle known to us as John the Beloved doesn't attempt to interpret the entire story about snakes and the bronze facsimile that Moses raises up on a pole. He makes this single comparison. Jesus will be lifted up like Moses lifted up the bronze serpent in the desert. Notice that John isn't interpreting the past. Instead, he's predicting the future. And not just the suffering of Jesus, but ultimately the healing of all who gaze upon the object lifted up against the sky. If we're going to make sense of this strange old story, we're going to have to do it on our own. John offers us no help. And nobody else mentions this story anywhere else in our Bible as far as I can recall. The story has been haunting and intriguing me for weeks. I remember when we first sat down and looked through the lectionary, and I thought, what? What is that doing here during Lent? Here's why it's intriguing me and haunting me. There's an internal principle here that I'm trying really, really hard at this stage in my life to reject. I wrote this week's sermon several different ways before I woke up on Wednesday, threw it all away, and started from scratch again. You see, I'm struggling because I've been resisting some of this. There, as it turns out, is a lot here not to like for me. So today I bring you some hustle and I bring you some resistance, but ultimately I bring you resignation to the principle that's confronting me through this little story, a truth that's been hollowing me out. I would love to talk about some other truth this morning in the middle of our desert, in the middle of Lent. I would love to teach you about the hidden trap door in the desert, you know, the one that makes the pain and the suffering stop, the one that fast tracks us all to Easter, to deliverance, to victory. I've been looking for that elevator, but I've found no such shortcut for myself, and believe me, I've looked. I hate suffering. I hate waiting. Waiting is suffering to me, and I live in near constant war with the mechanisms, the very mechanisms that are trying to grow me up, to mature me, to deepen my faith. You see, I'm a fighter, I'm a resistor. I want the goods, but I want them now, not later. Which is why I spend most of my time in the wilderness trying to make it stop, trying to find the trap door to a new reality. Instead, what I keep finding is my dizzying capacity to reject the means by which God seems to want to deliver me, to heal me, to teach me, to trust the great good. Which might be why I so deeply identify with Israel in the desert. I mean, what are they even there for? I mean, hadn't they suffered enough in Egypt as slaves under Pharaoh? What was the point of all the want and the wandering and the wondering and the waiting? I mean, honestly, ask yourself that question. They weren't there to map the wild places. They could have done that in a fraction of the time with a handful of people. They weren't there to perfect doctrines or beliefs or ideas about the origins of the universe. They were there to learn to trust. And it would take an entire generation to learn that lesson. Which is a bit of good news for free today if you are like me and you often feel like you're supposed to be in a hurry, like you should be passing these tests already. Today's passage is the capstone. It's the final story in a series that we call The Grumblings. And I love that title. It reminds me of a family road trip, right? The Grumblings. The King James Version, which is not my favorite version for obvious reasons, calls these the murmurings, which is almost just as good, to be honest. Up to this point, the people had complained or grumbled or murmured against their leader, Moses, and Aaron, his kid brother, which makes sense. You see, Moses and Aaron were learning to lead as much as the people of Israel were learning to follow. Trust comes slow, naturally, and there was a lot to dislike about this journey, about this trip. There was a lot to grumble about. There was the food, the heat, the bitter water, the crappy neighbors. Did I mention the food? There's no such thing as a good day with bad food. You know that. Did you happen to notice that funny little glitch in verse 5? I love this so much. It says, well, when the people grumbled, they said this, "Why have you brought us up out of Egypt to die in the wilderness? For there is no food and no water, and we detest this miserable food." And my question is, well, which was it? Did they or did they not have food? This reminds me of the kids standing in front of the closet. "Dad, I have no jackets." "Well, what about these four?" "Well, that's not the ones I want to wear." You get my point. They had food. They didn't like the options. Anyway, apparently, complaining about your situation or even about your leaders is one thing, and complaining about God directly is quite another. So God hears these rumbles in the camp, and this time, for whatever reason, God engages. A sweet little reminder of God's love and attention to his people is buried here in the details of this story, if you can see it. You see, grumblings are as often unspoken as not. They are internal struggles. They are deep internal dialogues mostly, and somehow God was hearing this. God was listening to the content of their inner narratives, and this blows my mind. God speaks the language of our deep disappointment. Did you know that? This has always been true about God. And this, had we been paying close enough attention, might have indicated to us that God was never out there in some heavenly place in the unreachable sky. We only thought that when we couldn't get there and see for ourselves. When astronauts and scientists began to plumb the depths of the cosmos, we were reminded what we always knew, that the God who hears our grumblings, our murmurings, that God has always been in here. It's terrifying news, really. To know that our source has always been that close. I wonder if our inner narratives are part of God's inner narratives, where then might we hide from such a love? Oh, we are held, friends. We are known entirely. Anyway, right about when the unspoken disappointments become heavy exhales, you know the ones, and deep sighs, you know what those feel like. Right about when we begin to talk amongst our closest friends about the ways none of this is quite turning out how we hoped, God already hears. God knew his chosen people were struggling to trust in his goodness. And they had learned enough about God, these people, to know that they needed Moses to intervene on their behalf when they were in trouble. Surely Moses could move the heart of this miracle-working God who had delivered them so many times before. And God must have had a team of fiery serpents on speed dial, on retainer, because when God commanded them to attack, they wasted no time in doing so. And the text says that many Israelites died as a result. But never forget this, friends. Punishment has never been the end goal of this God. Restoration is. That has always been true. Now, I'd love to tell you that God didn't actively send those fiery devils. I'd love to convince you that this story doesn't suggest that God broke God's own prohibition on killing in the Ten Commandments. But what good are visions, after all, of a homicidal and angry and vengeful God? They do little for us but provoke fear, which somehow by the end of this story becomes the very thing God seems to want to cure his people of. Now, I'm sure they thought the snakes were their biggest threat, but God had different ideas about what ailed them. Here is the unavoidable hook buried here, and this is the part that I'm fighting internally. How can the same object inflict injury and healing? How can a bronze snake offer a full recovery from the poisonous snake bite? God tells Moses to fashion a snake out of precious metal to cure the problem of a snake bite. Now, I'm sorry, this feels absurd to me, almost as absurd as being told that it'll take death to cure death, or that it'll take embracing the wilderness, the lostness, the terrifying sense of unfoundness to ever be truly full and found. This feels upside down to me, paradoxical, ironic, like God saying, stare down the very thing you fear in order to be set free. How absurd. If venomous snakes were biting your children and you were asked to look upon a snake for deliverance, wouldn't you struggle with that? Be honest. Let's just go back to captivity, the people would say. Let's go back to Egypt, where at least we understood our role. Besides, the food is better there. Did we mention the food? You see, there were songs or whispers or murmurs under the breath that could often be heard as this wandering people wandered in the desert. The chorus went something like this: freedom is too hard, we miss the pyramids. Can't we just go back home to the safety and the comfort of our bondage? I'm sure you never hear yourself whispering that tune. I'm sure it's only me. Moses tells the afflicted people, if you look on this bronze serpent and believe, you will be healed, which needs a bit of explanation. Let me remind you. In most of Scripture, when the word believe is used, it isn't referring to things like doctrines or dogmas or theological structures or frameworks. It's referring to trust. It wouldn't have been necessary for the snake-bitten Israelites to be able to explain and defend precisely how a bronze rendition of their worst fear could actually heal them. That wasn't necessary. They were only asked to trust God, that God was good enough to know what they needed, to want to set them free again. I don't know how to explain this to you because I am no ancient Hebrew scholar, but some theologians actually think that not only were the people who were bitten in the future after Moses raises the snake up on a pole, not only were they healed, but looking on this bronze icon, somehow God brought back to life all those who had perished from these snake bites up to that point. Now, I can't prove that, but it feels right to me. It feels like the insane goodness of the God I'm slowly learning to trust. I'll let you make that application for yourself. Here's my point. Maybe the source of pain and the source of healing can be the same if we trust that God can weave them both together. Maybe what we most fear can be instrumental in our ultimate freedom if we trust the process in the hands of a God who wants to set us free and keep us free. Now, I know this is a lot to get our heads around. Most of us spend our time cursing the desert itself. Just sit with me for a moment and you tell me if this feels like truth. You'll know. Your body will know. This is an ancient text with many possible reads. Mine is only one, but I see it as plain as day. And here's what I'm seeing and here's what I'm learning. The source of suffering in my life doesn't have to be removed for me to be set free. That freedom is actually already available. And if we had people in the room, I would hope to hear at least one suburban white, at least something out there. Thank you, Nick's family. They brought it this morning. Somehow the truth I'm beginning to discover is that the source of my suffering itself is being redeemed. It's being repurposed. Staring it down, not removing it, is becoming my way through. Through what exactly? Through my persistent resistance to trust in God's goodness. Maybe it would help us at this moment to be reminded what in the world we're doing here in the middle of Lent 2021 in the first place. Well, we're commemorating together Jesus' 40-day journey in the wilderness. We're trying to embrace the desert as Jesus did, willingly as our place of formation. Since by now you know that all good things come in loops, you know that Jesus too was remembering. He too was commemorating something far older than his journey in the wilderness. He was retelling the story of Israel's epic 40-year journey through the same wilderness, which is where today's story comes to us from. Now, they are not the same journey, that of Jesus and that of ancient Israel, not the same journey exactly. And the primary difference to me is that Jesus willingly embraced his. It seems to me that Israel, for the most part, rejected hers. And the church, in her wisdom, ties our yearly journey of discipleship, the task of preparing us for Easter, to this same wilderness metaphor. And perhaps they do it to encourage us to go about this more like the way Jesus did, by embracing this great shedding, by not fighting the loss and the want and the struggle, to ultimately allow the very thing we fear to be instrumental in our deliverance. Which brings me to this question. What do you fear? Now, I don't mean things like snakes or zombies or hair loss, although fear is fear and it's all primal, I get it, in one form or another. I'm asking you, when you get really honest, when you get really quiet, when you are worn down and hollowed out enough to be fully effaced and unfiltered, what do you fear? Can you name it? Well, I know what I'm afraid of. My deepest fear is to be abandoned, to be left alone, to be unpicked, unchosen, to be dismissed as not significant enough to have mattered in the end. That's my deepest fear. And there's a million reasons for it, and that I'm afraid of this, reasons that I won't torture you with this morning. But like you, I have tried every manner of plot and plan, every kind of device and technology, every variety of distraction and medication to rule out the possibility of ever being left truly alone, of ever being dismissed and forgotten. But alas, I have not managed. I have not succeeded. Somehow, I'm beginning to think that my fear of abandonment is like the snakes that we're reading about today. If I'm ever going to find peace, I'll have to do it by staring it down, by sitting in the presence of it. And if I'm fighting this truth, you can understand where these words come from today, because I would rather God remove it once and for all. Any chance that I ever get bit again, I want him to remove the possibility that I ever be left alone again. But, good friends, it seems God is choosing to set me free from the inside out, not by changing the configuration of my external world. He's not tinkering so much with circumstances. God is tinkering with my experience of them. My resistance to the process of learning to trust anyway, despite the possibility of being left alone, has only worn me down quicker. I can still see snakes, y'all. The sun is still burning in the desert sky. Manna still tastes less interesting than I'd like. And the people I love still possess the God-given right to get up tomorrow and decide I'm not worth sticking around for. And still, yet still, dear friends, I am well. Pattern is beginning to emerge, and I'm a slow learner, but I'm starting to see it. I'm starting to connect the dots. I think I'm learning that I may never manage to fully avoid the suffering I pray so hard to be delivered from, but that does not mean that God is not good. My way is through, which means for me at this stage, learning to name this fear, this primal fear of being abandoned, and learning to sit with it, committing to never abandon myself again. I'm finding peace in its presence. And slowly, gradually, painfully over time, I'm internalizing something magical that I've noticed about God during these times like these, that God doesn't pull away, God doesn't hide. He's here for it, all of it. Close enough to hear the internal grumblings, the unspoken murmurings of my heart. Close enough to redeem the suffering itself, to allow it to play a role in my own deliverance by reminding me of God's goodness. You know this. It's generally not the pain that kills us, it's our resistance to it. That's what does the damage. The wilderness is not designed to destroy you. The wanting and the waiting and the wandering isn't intended to destroy me. It's designed to remake us into the kind of people who know who and what sustains us. Trials build trust. Maybe there's never been another way. Maybe this is what King David meant when he wrote, "You prepare a table for me in the presence of my enemies." Maybe the bottom line has always been about trust. Trust implies memory. It implies knowledge of a history and a consistent track record. Trust implies remembering God's goodness at every turn. So again, what are you afraid of? Can you name it? In some fascinating way, I think this is exactly what this story is about today. By fashioning a snake made of bronze, Moses is acknowledging the source of pain and trauma. But he's remaking it, he's reshaping it. The snake isn't gone, it's been reworked and repurposed for God's purposes. For whatever it's worth, I don't think these fiery serpents represented a real epistemic threat to the life and the future of God's people any more than my fear does to me. But a lack of trust in God, now that certainly does. Forgetting God's goodness, yep, that can kill a fella. I'm beginning to believe that the real threat to God's people is failing to see that even in our pain, even in our struggle, even in our suffering, deliverance is always provided for already. So I want to ask this final question gently. Where did your injury occur? What bit you, dear one? Was it your family of origin? Was it a failed relationship, possibly even a failed marriage? If the damage happened in relationship, could it be that in relationship the healing might also begin to occur? Did your injury occur in church? Oh, I know mine did. If that's also true for you, I am so sorry. I truly am. Many of us weren't taught that wounds could even happen in spiritual communities. This is just a commercial for the summer. We're going to be naming that over the summer in a preaching series we're putting together on the subject of spiritual trauma, so stay tuned for that. Anyway, if your injury happened in church, might it possibly be that in a faith community, of course differently organized and of a different nature, could it possibly be that in a community of believers, your healing and your deliverance might also begin to occur? Oh, do you see the loop, guys? Are we loved by a God good enough? Are we held by a love old enough to accept that it can redeem all things that have wounded us and rewrite them into our story in ways that liberate us and set us free? Don't forget, the pharaohs wore snakes on their headdresses, y'all. A coiled up cobra around their head was their tiara. They called it the uraeus. It sat right between the eyes of the pharaohs, the rulers who embodied the enslavement of these people. Imagine being asked to trust an image that symbolizes the immortality and divine protection of your captor, your wounder, your enemy. Oh, can we trust that God can remake even that? Is there any part of your story that God can't redeem, repurpose, and remake? I hope your heart knows the answer to that question. Because I've got some ugly stuff in my story, and I'm watching some of those things begin to play key roles in new levels of deliverance for me. This final thought. The bronze serpent, or the Nehushtan as the Hebrews would have called it, well, it made an impact on the people of Israel. Generations later, a young king, Hezekiah, crushed what remained of a cult that had risen up around the veneration of this snake. Apparently, the artifact itself that had been preserved among the holy things in the temple, which feels fair given the kind of deliverance that this bronze snake brought to suffering people during hard times. But remember, incomplete models of the divine, which the Bible calls idols or graven images, they're not permitted. Remember that. Because they're incomplete. Does this bronze serpent represent something divine? It sure does, healing. But that's not the whole picture, is it? Our God isn't just about deliverance and healing. Our God is unfolding in the whole story, the bondage, the challenges, the trials, the wilderness, the desperation, the need, even the resulting death, and the ultimate deliverance. It will all be part of the story. And this is good news, if you think about it, because this means that everything is conspiring to teach us to trust and to release. Can we? Can fear teach us to trust? I don't know about you, but that's what it's doing for me. Pray with me. Lord, we've resisted and we've fought and we've struggled against so much of what you've given us as the answers to our own questions and desires to be more like you, and we've rejected the mechanisms, and today we are tired. And we bring you our exhaustion and we say, redeem it all. Redeem it all. Weave those injuries and those traumas back into the tapestry of our lives, which are an extension of your goodness. In your name we pray, Lord. Amen.
Matchless in grace and mercy. There is nowhere we can hide from your love. You are steadfast, never failing. You are faithful. All creation is in awe of who you are. You're the healer of the sick and the broken. You are comfort for every heart that mourns. Our King, our Savior, For eternity we will sing of all you've done. For eternity we will sing of all you've done. We sing, God with us, God for us. Nothing can come against, no one can stand between us. God with us, God for us. Nothing can come against, no one can stand between us.
Your heart moves with compassion. There is life, there is healing in your love. For the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit. For eternity, we will sing of all you've done.
For eternity we will sing of all you've done. We sing, God with us, God for us. Nothing can come against, no one can stand between us. God with us, God for us. Nothing can come against, no one can stand between us. Where there was death, you brought life, Lord. Where there was fear, you brought courage. When I was afraid, you were with me. You lifted me up. You lifted me out. There was death, you brought life, Lord. Where there was fear, you brought courage. When I was afraid, you were with me. You lifted me up, you lifted me out. You lifted me up, you lifted me out. You lifted me up, you lifted me out. We sing, God with us, God for us. Nothing can come against, no one can stand between us. God with us, God for us. Nothing can come against, no one can stand between us. Today we talked about the power of looking at the things that you're scared of. And we asked some folks in our community to do that this week.
Mark. Thank you, folks. I hope you're hearing the gospel as it's transforming us. I have a lot of friends, just to be clear, who've left this text behind for newer, fresher things from different places, different climes, not so many white folks, not so much certainty, all the things. And I'm compelled by those pieces of wisdom, and I can hold them in appropriate tension with our text. But as many times as I turn deep into the inner workings of these stories, they refresh and redeem. And so until they don't, here's where I will be. And so I hope that you're following along in Lent. I said this last week, maybe. The questions that come to us from the Lent box have been so transforming to our family. You may be surprised to know, I hope you're not surprised, but we don't have a lot of heavy spiritual conversations at my pastor's dinner table. We just don't. It's just not our deal, right? I'm trying not to scare my kids from the faith of their fathers, right? But these questions have brought up some fascinating things. And so hang with us. We've got another couple weeks. We'll be thinking about how to make space for David Ramirez, none other than the great David Ramirez, to come sing Easter for us. If you lost track of what's going on in his life, shame on you for that. You have social media. Pay attention. He just dropped a record called Backslider last night, midnight. It's his retelling of those ancient songs that held him as a child, and they'll be familiar to you. So he's going to come and do some of those with us for Easter. It'll be our second consecutive Easter as a live stream, which makes me very sad. But we're going to emerge. Hope is rising. Half the room is already vaccinated. Look at y'all half-vaccinated folks. I'm still trying to figure out how to lie and say I'm a teacher. I don't know. Trying to figure it out. Maybe I'll volunteer in Bastrop or something and get myself that shot. But it's a delight to be with you. Hang with us. Lent gets hard and dark, and then it gets better. And it's the story. It's those two things in tension. So, as always, thank you for your generosity. It takes money to make this work. Our budget is looking great. Our finances are strong, but we're looking at a big year ahead, and your continued generosity always matters. So follow along for ways to be involved there. One request to our community, if you're still watching, I'm sure there's about 4 of you who are. Tomorrow is the big day where we move Caesar's stuff from our storage behind here into a new place that he's leased for the following year, for the next year. At the end of a 2-year process, the papers have been granted by the government to come in the official capacity of a religious worker to help us build a Spanish-speaking church based out of this church here at Austin. And so he comes back with his family tomorrow, actually Tuesday. I need help moving his stuff. So I would like to know if you are the kind of person who has a strong back and a strong will and you're ready to wear a mask and stay distanced but help carry some things. See me here at church at 2 o'clock. Text Trey or email Trey and or me at jason@austennewchurch.com and let me know you're coming. It's always better with more people, as you know. That's less lifting for those of us who are getting old. But let's help get Caesar's place set up so that when they get here on Tuesday after 24 hours of continuous air travel, they'll have a place to collapse and fold into to begin this life anew. So if his story and Amor Original means anything to you, join me tomorrow. I know it's an odd time. It's spring break. It's 2 o'clock. A spring break. I think it's doable. The more the merrier, male, female, whatever it takes. Come and join us. And to wrap the service, not Mark Williams, but Mark Klensman has our benediction. He's going to read it today for us.
Yeah. Okay, so this isn't really a spoiler, but if you've seen WandaVision, they talk about Theseus's ship where something is rebuilt plank by plank. I wrote this benediction, and then my wife Bailey made it worth it. So shout out to Bailey. To those trying to make the desert a home, or at least a home for those you love. We breathe the air of a new place, not fully understanding the smells. Can a tent be a house? Can a flap of fabric be a window? Can sand be a welcome mat? How do we trust in this new house before calling it a home? Sharing dark halls defies reason, sharing suffering the same. To be fully known, we learn that trauma shared is a doorway to connection. While fear threatens to close the door, be there equipped with the tools to loosen the hinges. For in this space, church, the unknown is welcome. As we grumble quietly at our captors and loudly at our liberators, we realize to know this place, this people, whether in daylight or dark halls, and be known in return is home. Go now, let fear give light to what most needs sharing, and have a great week.